had always tried to do the right thing, always tried to be the one to show up when my family needed me, even when I didn't feel like I was truly needed. My sister and I had a complicated relationship. We were close when we were younger, but as we grew older, things started to shift. The competition between us was subtle at first, little jabs here and there, but it became more noticeable as time went on. I'll admit, I had always been the one to try and prove myself. My parents were constantly comparing us, but in a way that made it clear they thought my sister was the golden child. She was always the one with the pretty smile, the perfect grades, the popular friends. And I was just the quiet one, the one who stayed in the background, never quite good enough for their attention. Still, I didn't let that get to me. I worked hard, built my career from the ground up, and made sure to keep my head high even when it felt like everyone else was always ahead. But when the time came, when I gave my sister the benefit of the doubt and went above and beyond to help her out of a tough spot, she didn't even flinch. No gratitude, no thank you, just an unspoken understanding that I was expected to help and she was going to take it for granted. That moment, when I saw my sister walk away from my gesture as if it meant nothing, it hit me. And I finally realized that if I wanted something, if I wanted to be truly seen, I'd have to help myself. No one was going to hand it to me, not my parents, not my sister, not anyone. So I decided to take control. I built my own legacy. But here's the twist. While I was quietly climbing my way up, she stayed where she was, comfortable in the life that everyone else had made for her. Little did she know, my own success was about to leave her with nothing but the shock of realizing what I had done for myself, all while she remained stuck. It wasn't about getting back at her, it was about me. It was about realizing that if they couldn't see my worth, I would show them what I was capable of. But what happened next would completely shake things up. And I had no idea how far things would go before she realized that I had made it on my own. Growing up, my sister and I were always put side by side, constantly compared. It was like a race where no matter how hard I tried, I could never catch up. She was the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. She was beautiful, popular, and everyone seemed to love her. It felt like the world revolved around her, and I was just there. It wasn't that I hated her, I didn't. I loved her in my own way, but it was impossible not to feel invisible when everything she did seemed to shine while I was stuck in her shadow. I often thought maybe it was just me, that I was imagining things. Maybe if I tried harder, worked smarter, I'd be seen too. But then came the endless stream of comparisons. Why can't you be more like your sister, they'd say. Every time I failed at something, which to be honest, was a lot. Even when I succeeded, it was never enough. If I got an A, she got an A+. If I won something, she won twice as much. It was exhausting. Then came the day I decided to change things. My sister had gotten into a bit of trouble. She had gone through a rough patch, and when no one else was stepping up, I decided to be the one to help her. I knew she had made some mistakes, but I wasn't going to hold that against her. After all, she was my sister. I figured it was time for me to show her and the rest of the family that I was capable of something more than just being in the background. I had a bit of success in my career at that point. Nothing huge, but enough to make a difference. So I bought her a new car. It wasn't brand new, but it was a solid vehicle, something that would help her get back on track. I remember the smile on her face when I handed her the keys. I thought that was a moment we could share, a moment where I could finally prove that I was there for her, that I was capable of kindness and generosity, despite everything. But her response? She barely even said thank you. She took the keys and drove off as if it was just another thing she expected from me. And that was it. There were no words of gratitude, no acknowledgement of my sacrifice. It hurt, but I wasn't shocked. After all, this was the pattern. What really stung was when I found out a few months later that in their will, my parents had left her everything. Not just the car, but the house, the family savings, everything. My name wasn't even mentioned. It was like I'd never existed in their eyes. My sister, the perfect child, was to get it all, and I was left with nothing. Again. I stood there in disbelief, staring at the will, the papers in my hand shaking. How could they do this? How could they reward her for doing nothing while I worked my whole life to prove I was worthy of their love and respect? I helped her when no one else would, and yet this was how I was treated. I should have been devastated, but instead, something inside me clicked. This was the last straw. I didn't need them. I didn't need their approval or their legacy. I would build my own. It was time for me to take control. I didn't know exactly how, but I was going to prove to everyone, especially my parents and sister, that I could create my own path. They had underestimated me, and it was time for me to show them that I didn't need their validation to succeed. I didn't tell anyone about my decision to break free from their expectations. I didn't need to. I started working harder than ever, diving into new projects, growing my career, and building something of my own. But as the months passed, my resentment toward my sister grew. I saw how easily she moved through life, taking everything for granted. She still relied on our parents' wealth, their connections, their help. Meanwhile, I was building my future from the ground up. The more I succeeded, the more my sister seemed to slip into a life that was comfortable, predictable, and completely unearned. It was like she was stuck in her own little bubble, completely unaware of the effort and struggle I was putting in. The turning point came when I got my first major business deal. It was a breakthrough, something I'd been working toward for years. It was a partnership with a company that had the potential to change everything for me. But instead of celebrating, my sister called me up, asking if I could help her with something. I didn't have time for her requests anymore. I realized that all she ever saw me as was someone who could help her. She never even asked how I was doing or what I was working on. It was always about her. That was when I realized it wasn't just about the will or the car. It was about years of being overlooked, years of giving while receiving nothing in return. I was done. After that moment, I made a choice. I would no longer allow myself to be taken for granted. If my family and my sister couldn't see my worth, I would show them. I knew it wasn't just about money, cars, or assets. It was about respect. But how could I make them realize that I was more than just a shadow to be overlooked? How could I get their attention when they had always treated me like a second-rate family member? I started by diving deeper into my work. I didn't just want success, I wanted monumental success. I made plans, gathered resources, and set things into motion. I was no longer afraid of the long hours or the grind. If they thought I couldn't do it, I was going to prove them wrong. But as I climbed the ladder, my sister's world continued to look the same. It was like she was still stuck in that bubble I had once been a part of. I couldn't help but watch her, feeling the old resentment and bitterness stirring inside me. She had everything handed to her. Why didn't she have to work for anything? How was it that the world treated her like she was special while I had to scratch and claw just to be noticed? It wasn't until one afternoon, a few months later, that I found the one thing that could make this whole situation right. I was going through some old family paperwork when I stumbled across a financial document, a ledger of sorts, with a bunch of details about my family's business. My parents had set up an inheritance, but there was something in the fine print I hadn't noticed before. A clause that would have made me the rightful beneficiary of more than just money. It would have put me in control of the family business. It was all there, clearly laid out, but somehow my sister was going to get everything while I was left out in the cold. At that moment, the anger inside me transformed into something else. It wasn't just about proving myself anymore, it was about justice. They had stolen my future, given everything to my sister, and now I was going to take it all back. But I couldn't do this impulsively. I had to be careful. I couldn't just confront them. No, I had to plan. I began researching the legal details of the will, the inheritance, the business setup, everything. There were gaps I could exploit, ways I could legally claim what was rightfully mine. I spoke with lawyers, gathered evidence, and formulated a strategy that would shake my family to the core. I didn't just want to take back what I was owed. I wanted them to realize what they had missed by overlooking me for so long. The more I researched, the more I realized just how deeply my family had underestimated me. My sister had been living her life thinking she was invincible, thinking that the world would always be at her feet. Little did she know, the very foundation of everything she thought was hers was built on lies. And I was about to expose it. I had already made progress in my business venture, and the financial document I found gave me the leverage I needed to push forward. But that wasn't enough. I needed the perfect moment. I needed my sister to let her guard down, to trust me again. Just enough for me to execute my plan. It wasn't easy to play the role of the good sister after everything that had happened, but I was willing to do it. I started to rebuild our relationship, keeping things light and friendly, all while gathering the information I needed. She seemed to think that everything was fine between us. After all, she still came to me when she needed help, though I could tell it was only when it benefited her. It didn't matter anymore. I was playing the long game. Then, one day, out of the blue, my sister called me and asked if I wanted to meet. She said she had something important to discuss. I had been waiting for this moment, but I knew I had to be careful. She had no idea what I had been doing behind the scenes. When we met, she told me that things weren't going well for her. She was struggling with a few personal issues, and she admitted that she didn't know what to do. For a moment, I almost felt pity for her, but I quickly reminded myself that this was just another one of her patterns, asking for help without ever truly appreciating it. "Do you think you could help me out?" she asked, her voice soft, almost pleading. It was the perfect setup. I smiled, but in my head, I was already calculating my next steps. "Of course," I said, "I've got your back, but there's something we need to talk about first." I wasn't going to reveal everything right away. I needed her to think that I was still the helpful sister she always took for granted. I needed her to let her guard down completely. And as we talked more, I realized that she was so desperate for support that she didn't even notice the trap I was setting. As we parted ways, I felt a sense of satisfaction that I hadn't experienced in years. I had her exactly where I wanted her. Now it was time to execute the final part of my plan. I had everything I needed: legal documents, proof of the inheritance clause, and a strategy that would expose everything to my parents and my sister. The moment was coming, and when it arrived, it would change everything. The day had finally arrived. I had set everything in motion, and now it was time to bring it all to the surface. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I prepared for the confrontation. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about taking back control of my life, showing my family what they had done to me, and most importantly, forcing them to face the consequences of their actions. I invited my sister and parents over to my place, pretending it was just another casual get-together. I had made sure everything was set up perfectly: my documents, my evidence, my plans, all ready to be unveiled. My sister was acting like everything was normal, unaware of the storm I was about to unleash. She seemed so comfortable in her role, acting like I was the same old sister who would never question her. When everyone arrived, we exchanged pleasantries, and I kept my demeanor calm, even friendly. I wanted them to feel comfortable, to feel like nothing was out of the ordinary. But underneath, I was seething. I was ready to expose the truth. I had been waiting for this moment for so long, and now that it was here, I wasn't going to back down. We sat down in the living room, chatting, until I decided it was time. I took a deep breath, making sure I had everyone's attention. "I've been doing some thinking," I started, my voice steady but strong, "and there's something I need to show you all." I pulled out the financial documents I had discovered, the ones that outlined the inheritance and the hidden clauses in my parents' will. I could see the confusion in their faces, especially my sister's. She had no idea what was coming. My parents were silent, their eyes darting back and forth between me and the papers. They could feel the tension building, but they didn't know what to expect. "Do you recognize this?" I asked, pointing to the clause that had left me out in the cold. They looked at it, and for a moment, there was a silence that spoke volumes. My sister shifted uncomfortably in her seat, but she tried to act like she didn't know what I was talking about. But I wasn't going to let her off the hook. I laid everything bare. "You never thought I'd figure this out, did you?" I continued, keeping my eyes locked on her. "All these years, I've been left out. You had everything handed to you while I was left to figure things out on my own. And I know why." My sister's face paled. My parents looked at each other, clearly uneasy, but they didn't say anything. They didn't know how to respond. The truth is, while I've been working hard to build my future, you've been living off the privileges and advantages I never had. But now I've found what's mine. This inheritance, it's all supposed to be mine, and I'm taking it." My sister opened her mouth, but no words came out. She was in shock. My parents, on the other hand, were visibly angry. My mother tried to say something, but I wasn't having it. "No," I cut her off, my voice firm. "You don't get to make excuses, not anymore. You've always assumed I was the one who would just sit back and let things happen. Well, guess what? I'm not the one waiting anymore." I could see the cracks in their armor. My mother and father were stumbling for words, trying to justify their decisions, but they couldn't. My sister looked like she wanted to cry, but there was no sympathy left in me for her. "You don't get to play the victim anymore, not after everything you've put me through," I said. "And as for you," I turned to my sister, "you've never seen me for who I am. You thought I was weak, but now I'm standing on my own 2 feet. You won't get to take what belongs to me." My sister's face flushed with anger. "You're not getting anything from me," she snapped, her voice rising. "You think you can just take everything I have? You're nothing without me." Her words stung, but they only solidified my resolve. I wasn't going to back down now. I had worked for everything I had earned, and it was time to show them all that I wasn't some second-rate family member to be overlooked. "You want to see what I can do without you? You want to know what I've been building on my own?" I asked, my voice rising in intensity. "Watch and learn." The room was silent for a moment. My sister couldn't even look at me anymore. My parents, once confident in their choices, now saw the reality of what they had done. The tables had turned. I wasn't just taking the inheritance I had been denied, I was taking control of my life, my future, and my legacy. And as I stood there looking at them, I realized something crucial. This wasn't just about money or property. It was about me taking back my power. I had won. Not because I had anything to prove to them, but because I had finally learned to prove it to myself. The aftermath of that day was like nothing I had ever experienced before. For the first time, I felt a sense of control over my life, something I had longed for so many years. After the confrontation, my sister avoided me like the plague. She couldn't handle the guilt of what I had exposed, and neither could my parents. My mother, once my rock, became distant and cold, while my father barely spoke to me. The silence between us was deafening, and it only served to remind me of everything they had taken from me. But I didn't let their silence bother me. In fact, I embraced it. This was my victory, not just for me, but for all the times I had been overlooked, ignored, and treated like I didn't matter. I wasn't going to let them make me feel guilty anymore. I continued to build my future step by step, and with every accomplishment, the weight of their betrayal lifted a little more. I sold the property that was rightfully mine, took the proceeds, and invested in a business that had always been a dream of mine. I worked day and night, never stopping, never looking back. It wasn't about proving anything to my family anymore. It was about proving to myself that I was capable of building something like great, something that didn't rely on anyone but me. Months passed, and slowly but surely, my life began to transform. The business took off, and my financial stability grew. I found peace in the idea that I had finally built something that was my own, something that no one could take away from me. As my success grew, so did my sense of self-worth. I no longer needed their approval. I had found my own path. And then came the day I got a letter in the mail from my parents. They had sent me their apologies, but it was too late. Their words felt hollow, like they were just trying to make amends because they saw what I'd accomplished. The letter was full of regret. And while part of me wanted to forgive them, I couldn't ignore the damage they had done. I realized that their apology was more about trying to fix the broken relationship with me than truly understanding how they had betrayed me. I didn't respond to their letter. Instead, I focused on what truly mattered: my work, my happiness, and my own family that I had built from the ground up. The people who supported me, believed in me, and respected me. They were the ones who truly mattered. As time passed, I grew even stronger. I made a name for myself, not in their shadow, but on my own terms. And every time I reached a new milestone, I realized something powerful. I didn't need them anymore. I didn't need their approval or validation to feel worthy. I had become the person I had always wanted to be, and I had done it without their help. Years later, my sister reached out to me. She asked if we could meet, but I was no longer interested in repairing a relationship that had been built on lies and betrayal. She had her chance and she blew it. I knew that if I met her again, it would only be to reopen old wounds. Wounds that had finally begun to heal. I politely declined, and I felt no guilt. I had come too far to let the past dictate my future. The legacy I had built was mine, and no one could take it from me. I had finally taken control of my life, and I was proud of everything I had achieved. The family that once tried to break me was now nothing more than a distant memory. They were no longer the ones who defined my worth. As I looked at my thriving business, my happy family, and my life that was finally on track, I couldn't help but feel a sense of victory. I had done it. I had built my own legacy, and nothing would ever take it away from me.